I'm recording the introduction to season 2 of the podcast, Felt Matters, out and about with my dog, who, because she has had a bad paw, hasn't been out for a little while and is stopping and starting and sniffing at every single little bush and leaf and tree. And it's so exciting. But it does make it quite hard for me to concentrate. Nonetheless, I just thought that you might like to accompany me on one of my practice recordings. This is what I've been doing throughout the last few months as I try to get used to just hearing my voice being recorded. And believe you me, when Vivienne and I started recording ourselves, we didn't find it easy. That may come across that we tried different methods. Sometimes we would script something, sometimes we would rehearse it and then just say it again, and other times we would completely ad-lib. And what is interesting is that we've had quite a lot of feedback about our first season, and it's been great, actually. It's been reassuring and encouraging and made us think, well, okay, we're not super experts at podcasting, but we are connecting with people. They do like to hear what we have to say and what our guests like to say. So since the publication of season 1, which was on the 1st of September, we've had an opportunity to talk to people, listen to people, and read what they have to say and work out which parts of the podcast went well and which parts we will do differently this time round. And I think we have a very good and interesting season coming up, which you will enjoy. I'm pretty sure of it. We already have several interviews and chats recorded, and we're just putting them all together now. And of course, by the time you hear this, we will have done all the fun parts. Well, the fun part for me in particular is the editing. And it's something I had never done before, but I have really enjoyed it. It turns out I might be a little bit geekier than I had realized. But anyway, so one of the techniques that I've found works really well, or has worked really well for this second season, is getting into conversation and then and a conversation that feels relaxed but goes on for, a couple of hours. And then out of that couple of hours, then I sort of pare it down to the amount of chat that we think will be interesting to you, the listener. So this morning, Vivienne and I went into the studio for the very first time since wrapping up the first season. And it was emotional, much more than I had even appreciated it would be. So when I was thinking, well, how much of this am I going to edit? I've decided not to. So the bit you're going to hear now is Vivienne and I in the studio for the first time in a few months. And this is how the conversation went.
Hello, and welcome to Felt Matters, a brand new podcast on all things felting. Brought to you by the education team of the International Feltmakers Association. And we're your hosts, and both keen feltmakers. I'm Vivienne Morpeth, coming to you from sunny Lincolnshire in England.
And I'm Heather Potton in the lovely city of Edinburgh in Scotland. And welcome back into the studio. It's lovely to see you.
Oh, it's so nice to be back, Heather. Gosh, what a long summer we've had.
Yeah, it seems to have been long, and yet now we're right back into autumn, aren't we?
Oh, yes, and right back, ready to start talking about the podcast, how it's gone, and our upcoming season 2.
You're absolutely right. I am nervous. I don't know what is going on. I suppose what it is,
yeah,
if I'm kind of brutally honest, is I'm so anxious about you.
Oh, really? Oh, that's very kind of you.
And yeah. You must be finding it hard to go through all of this, but it's hard for other people too, I guess.
I think it's particularly hard for other people. And it's particularly hard to grapple with it all because it's been such a roller coaster. Last year when I started my chemo and I had my 6 months of 8 treatments, and I thought, gosh, this is fine. This is fine. I was so excited when I got to the end. And I thought that's a real personal achievement.
Yeah.
And I'd listened to a lot of You, Me and the Big C, and Deborah James dying last year and all of that. And I'd sort of gone through all of that. And I thought, that's another level. And here am I, having my first lot of chemo, and it's probably going to set me on the future course for, years of not having chemo. And so I felt that I didn't really have a right to have a voice because there were many people who were on more complex journeys and really facing difficult situations and difficult choices and ways of communicating with that. And it was only 2 or 3 months afterwards, and I began to think, I think I can feel a little lump in my lower abdomen. And then, the PET scans begin to show things. And then there's talk, you might need a little bit more chemo. And so it goes on.
Right.
And then suddenly it goes from, well, we're going to set up this kind of chemo in April to, this chemo isn't working. So let's try another. And 4 lines of chemo later, and they suddenly think, well, actually, you're not responding to the chemo. And that is a big revelation. And suddenly I think, maybe it's time for me to actually find my voice and say, it is complex when the normal plans don't go normal. And then in between, of course, actually being really ill, and being really ill to the point where sometimes I've been a bit scared.
Yeah.
And yet, you hold all of that together for family and friends and yourself, really, because you don't want to admit, I feel a bit scared today.
Yes.
But it's incredible, in a hospital where you have this extraordinary team of people around you, and they're dealing with all sorts of difficult decisions, but they still manage to say things in a very constructive way. So they say hard facts, but with a positive outcome. And that's probably what keeps everybody going when you get into these complex situations and you've got to change your course of treatment and then change another course of treatment and another one. And then they start to use a different language.
I think
talk about recovery and rescue and stuff like that.
All the time that we were recording season 1, I felt much as you did, I think, because of the way you were talking about it, and it just seemed as if, as you say, there was a certain path, and you follow the path, and you said, okay, I'm going to have the chemo, then I'm going to have the stem cell transplant, and I'll feel crap for a while, and then there'll be the recovery. And then there's been so many, a hiccup doesn't start to describe it, but it's been these kind of stop start.
Yeah.
And so I think for this is an utterly selfish, but for me, I've been thinking, I know the podcast means a lot to you. It was your idea in the first place, and the response to it has been really positive. I mean, I'm sure that must have been very uplifting for you to hear.
It's hugely rewarding, isn't it? Because you and I invested time from, was it September last year, when you agreed and offered to come on board, and suddenly we're talking about a collaboration.
Yes.
And we worked from then till June.
Well, yes. I mean, at least
and you were still editing in June, maybe the beginning of July.
Yeah.
And we worked every week.
Yes. And we've been
we're volunteers.
Yeah. That's true. And
with other commitments, big other commitments.
Yes. And we've also been working, through the summer. And although we're in the studio now for the first time and it's October, we've been collecting material for this second season.
Yeah.
Since the first season went out. And obviously it's really rewarding as well for people to say, well, when's the next season coming out? I mean, that's obviously fantastic, but it's a process, isn't it?
I think it is, and it evolves. We're not designing something to fit a brief that somebody else has written.
No.
We are writing it ourselves, and we're discovering it, we're experiencing it, we're thinking it, we're journeying it, really. And so that takes time. It's not something you can sit down on a Monday morning and say, okay, let's write ourselves the next season's podcast and we'll start recording on Friday.
We did actually think, though, I think when we started, we did think that we would follow a certain pattern, and already through having done the first season and getting the feedback, I don't think the second season is going to necessarily follow exactly the same path, is it?
No, it's going to be completely different. And I think we've grown so much. I mean, it's hard for us as individuals to see how we've grown. It's only when, we look back and we read what we've done. And I know writing the blogs, together, that's given us another way of analysing what we've done. And the article in the International Felt Makers Journal, seeing how we've come around it, that we realize how much we've learned, and that has given us confidence to make decisions about the second season and to bring some ideas that maybe we had in the back of our minds that we could actually formulate now.
And also some things that we think, well, they obviously didn't strike the right chord, or, the things that people found interesting. Some of them obviously are things that we did too. Others are things that we didn't necessarily think were that important, perhaps, but they have registered with people, and some of the comments have been specific areas that they've liked. So what's on my table seems to have been very popular.
Yes, absolutely. Great. You were talking about books.
I was talking about, well, yes, I was just saying that you chatted quite a lot about the wool book and the, what's it called, British Wool for Felt Making book.
Yes.
And perhaps we won't do quite so much of that, or we'll do it in a different way. What do you reckon?
I reckon a different way would be really interesting, because that was exceedingly hard work to do. And I hadn't envisaged talking myself about a book at such length. And the parts of the podcast that I know I enjoy a lot are when we're chatting and we've got a bit of a discussion going, because ideas flow and different angles develop, which you don't get from a monologue, really, because a monologue is a pre-prepared presentation. And nobody really wants a presentation or a lecture on a book, be it all a really lovely book and one that I really enjoyed sharing. And I do think there's a lot of scope for just bringing it in more conversationally.
I think one of the things that absolutely blows me away about the way you conduct life is that no matter what you're going through, you still manage to knock up a few hares and dogs and because I didn't realize until you wrote the blog that you had done some needle felting based on the book.
Oh yes, I had, and I actually taught that. I had a whole series of workshops in the spring this year. I crammed in a lot of teaching, and I taught both of those techniques. So I worked up those techniques, and the book really prompted me to work with some natural materials and to keep going back to local wool and natural materials, because it's very easy, when you look at a wool website and supplier, to be drawn into the beautiful shades of colours and textures and all the rest of it, rather than to be guided a little bit also by your own grounding.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting that you used local breeds. I've recently just been to France, where I didn't do any felt making whatsoever, but I did go to an incredible artisan weekend. So there were 3 venues, one of which was in the cloisters of the local church in Saint-Emilion. And there were 2 felt makers there. They were the only felt makers that I saw throughout, and there's everything else, but only two felt makers. And one in particular was something that I wanted to be really impressed by because it was clear that they were using local fleeces, but they were using them to make slippers and hats, both
Oh,
of which,
you
yeah,
sent me a photo. It looked like a beautiful place to be
it was
exhibiting
a
at this
beautiful
cloisters.
place. It was a stunning place, but I was disappointed. I have to be honest, because the man who, and it was a man as well, the man who was making the slippers and the hats, and they were clearly local breeds. They were sort of creamy with and dark, and I have no idea what breeds they were.
Yes.
But the slippers were not fit for purpose.
Oh goodness.
They were, they looked like pre-felt, a thick pre-felt, and it was, to me, I knew that as soon as you started to wear those, they would just fall apart. And I was really disappointed. And as a result, I copped out. I didn't speak to him, partly because my French isn't good, but partly because I'm not sure what I would have said.
Well, what jumps to mind is does he wear a pair himself?
Yes. Yes, perhaps. But I was sad to see that, because I thought that this is an example of felt making. He
Yeah.
has a substantial stall full of slippers and hats that, if anyone bought them and tried to wear them and use them for what they're meant to be for, they would be deeply disappointed.
Do you think he was appealing to tourists because local people would come back and knock on his door if
Well, I
they
don't
got
know.
holes in their slippers too soon?
Well, it's hard to say. I think there was certainly a lot of French being spoken, so they might have been
Right.
tourists from within France, but there were also people from different countries. But he wasn't. There weren't lots of people clustered around his stall,
Mm.
so that was a disappointment to me. Um, so yeah, I think our story of felt still needs to be spread further. And
Well, it's one of those learning curves, isn't it? Where as felt makers, I think we've all been there, where you think, "Gosh, I can make felt and I can make anything." And
Mm,
look, I've made a pair of slippers, and they feel lovely and they're soft and they really, cling to your toes and everything. But can you still wear them 6 months later? This is the question. And as felt makers, we think after the first month, oh, people have said they're lovely. I'll make some and sell them on a stall, and they're not giving it that breadth of the 100 hours as a maker and making each
no.
thing 100 times so that you actually logically improve.
Yes, I think, I mean, I remember one of the very early bags that I made for somebody, and it was a commission and it was a birthday present. And she said, "Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it." And then a month or two later, she said, "It's really quite pilled. And is there anything you
Yes.
can do about it?" So I got it back, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is really awful. It's a disaster." This was early on. And so I refelted it. And I suppose it probably worked a bit better. But
Mm.
obviously, by this time, it was about half the size.
She asked for a refund,
Yeah.
50% refund.
So,
The
so
lost bag.
she had a nice purse, as we say in the UK, meaning money holder rather than
Yes.
bag. But that was a sort of little lesson. And I remember again another bag that I made early on, where I made what I wanted and then I started to use it, and the handle just got longer and longer and longer because, of course, I hadn't folded it properly and I didn't really know how to.
But I think we've all been there, and your solution of actually using it yourself first and then discovering the
Yeah,
technical things that needed changing is the
yeah.
way to do it. But it's very hard. Even as an experienced felt maker, I find myself making things and think, oh wow, that's so exciting, I must
Mm,
share it. And really, they're not always ready to be shared.
not always. So while you've been going through all of your different therapies and treatments, and spending quite a lot of time away from home as well, haven't you?
I have actually, yes. I did a calculation, and I think I've in the last 6 months, I've spent the equivalent of the last 2 months in hospital.
Wow,
Not
that's
staying over all the time, maybe a
no,
month equivalent staying over, and the rest is day appointments. And
right.
a
But
week or
that's,
so ago, I was in for 4 days. No, I don't mean 4 continuous days, 4 separate days.
yeah,
So it's a new job.
yes, and So what you sent a recording which we'll be putting onto the podcast about you needle felting swallows while you were in hospital. And again, as I say, I find that incredible. I think at the most I'd probably be able to read, but the idea of felt making whilst going through all of this and actually surrounded by the paraphernalia of hospital, how does that work for you?
It works really well, actually, because reading is quite hard. You've got to concentrate and analyze what you're reading. And for me, a lot of the time has been trying to block out what I'm thinking.
Mm.
So I'm listening a lot to the radio, to podcasts, to stories, and I'm immersing myself in conversations. So I've I've started to chat a lot more than I have done in the previous months, and I found out a lot about people, about the nurses, about what they like to do when they're not in the hospital, and other people going through treatment. So I find that anything external to myself is easier than being inside my own head. So working with felt, of course, once you've conceived an idea, to actually then work through your hands and your energy and your shoulders and feel that your body's doing a job for you rather than just taking your energy and feeling sick is a really positive experience. Admittedly, everything has become smaller, so I haven't made a jacket in the last few months.
You'd have to take your ironing table in with you.
I would, I know. Yes. I've got it actually up in my studio now, so, it shows a sort of slight
Well,
different
that was one
place
of
of
your
mind this
that
week.
that was one of your tips that somebody commented on the use of an ironing board for felting sleeves and on a jacket.
I noticed that too, and it is a good tip. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think it's my original. It's not my original one. I probably got it somewhere,
Oh well,
down
I think
down the journey, but it's very useful.
yeah.
Um,
Well, so apart from the
so I
the
wasn't actually needle felting. I had made these little wet felted birds, which I had seen from somebody on Pinterest, and unfortunately, I saved a photograph, but I didn't save the name of the felt maker. So maybe the felt maker will pop out sometime and say, "Oh, it's me." I think the felt maker was from Eastern Europe,
Mhm.
and she had made these beautiful kind of slightly different swallows. And I'd thought, as you mooch through Pinterest and I'd saved this photograph, thought that's lovely. So I had the photograph for maybe 2 or 3 years. And I just felt the urge to make some wet felted birds because I have made a lot of needle felted birds, but I wanted to make some wet felted, sit down wet felting.
Yes.
Uh, and So I made these, but then, like you say, I needed to finish some of the details with needle felted. I needle felted the beaks, and I hand stitched some beads onto the chest of the birds,
Right.
uh,
So
and so on. So I turn them into brooches.
it's a good project because it's something you could just put into your bag and take with you when you went
It
to
was a
the
perfect
hospital.
hospital project, but I was a bit worried about freaking out all the nurses with my
With your
rows and
needle.
rows and rows of black birds, not blackbirds, but
I, I
black
was thinking,
swallows
I was thinking more
on
about
the
the
table.
needles, but
And the needles,
yeah.
yes. I hid those.
Oh, what down your sock, like a ski and do. So apart from that, have you been managing to get any felting done at home or
I have
not?
actually. I've done some other kinds of felting, which I've really enjoyed. I've gone back to making pictorial pieces,
Hmm.
but not what you might call painting with wool. So I've not done a base and then drawn out the fibers and created things. I have used pieces of felt that I've got. So
Yes.
bits of pre-felt, bits
Mm.
of cut-off felt that I've carded the back of to make them fluffy again.
Yeah.
And I've dyed a lot of pre-felt. I bought lengths of white felt and I've dyed a lot of it actually to make the kits for the Nuno felting uh, Discovering Felt Course 5. I've been making the kits for that, and there's an element of pre-felt in it. So I've dyed those. So these are the tiny little offcuts. And nothing is lost, like in your beautiful rainbow piece that you made. Well, I did a sort of similar thing. In fact, I went back to your rainbow piece. Now I'm talking about it, I'm remembering, and to see how you had used felt rather than just pre-felts, because
Yes.
I'd not
Yeah.
felted again with felt.
Mm.
But anyway, I got a carder and I carded the back of it. And so I've been making these sort of small little landscapes again, wet felting, sitting at a table. So sit down felt, but not needle felting. So Heather, you've been felting this summer as well?
I don't think you should even do that, Vivienne, because as soon as we try as soon as we try to script ourselves, we just mess it up. I don't know what's wrong.
We go all formal. Somebody said to me, a local friend said to me, "Gosh, you've got a different voice in your podcast."
Yes, I know.
I was concentrating, and some of it was scripted, and
yeah. Well, I think the scripting stuff probably isn't our best work.
well, not with hindsight, but at the time it gave. Well, I don't know about you, but it gave me the confidence, because it was hard for my brain to work as quickly
Yeah.
as I needed to without mumbling or stumbling too often. I think I'm getting better. I think you're really good at it. And also I think that's come because you practice as well. You sent me this summer, as well as felting, you've sent me lovely recordings. Whenever you've gone somewhere, you've sent me these extraordinary recordings about what you're seeing and thinking about. And that's been really beneficial for our collaboration. But I can see it's also developed your recording and speaking skills.
Maybe. I hope so. I mean, yes, I hope so. And I've enjoyed sending them to you. I don't send them to other people because I don't think, I don't know if they would appreciate them in the way that you do. So that's it's been good. It's been good to do that.
Well, I'm very flattered. And
but that's one way.
Also, it keeps the world open,
right?
And it takes me to another part. And because I know from my childhood bits of your world, that's really lovely.
Yes, right. Sitting on Portadown
to see it
Beach
from a contemporary perspective.
Yes, although
really
not
lovely.
all changes are good, but yeah. I decided that I had not been felting for a while. And when you're talking about it and you're recording and you're, working on the website and all of these things and not felting, I felt a bit of a fraud, really.
Oh, nonsense. Tell us what you've been doing, Heather.
I joined one of Fiona Duthie's online courses, which are always extremely well run.
Absolutely.
With enormous amounts of content. In fact, so much that I don't think anybody managed to do all of the different techniques, but you kind of chose the ones that appealed to you. But equally, if you didn't start at the beginning, you couldn't just dip in halfway through because you had to get the basics before you could move on, which, is obviously always the case. And so it was all about raised surfaces and creating stems. So all the stems are then used to create different surfaces, which are vastly risen from the original surface. And when I showed them to people, they immediately assumed that I'd done them through needle felting because they are so structural. So this one is loops.
Which, wow, that's extraordinary.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're all beautiful. They're quite sinister in some ways.
So the loops are intertwined.
Yes.
And go over and under each other, but not in an organized way. Did you make the loops first and then the backing, or
well, you see, I can only tell you so much because I can't really give you the details.
Oh no, not the details. We don't need the techniques, but just the what came first.
Well, certainly, you the first thing you have to do is you make the stems,
right?
And you have to make the stems very, very well. So you fool them very well. before you can add anything else. So once you've got the idea of the stems, then you expand that technique and you add stems to each other so that you then create branches and
Wow.
what Fiona calls vines as well. So then you can also you can see that there's a lot of height here.
So you're showing me a second piece now.
Yes, this is a
where the
second
stems
piece.
aren't coming
They're
up
not
and then
looping over
going
each other.
back into the base.
No, I've
These
got.
are growing out, like you say, like stems.
So this is a sort of single vine, and it
Yes.
attaches to the base in 5 different places. And then it stands also very proud of the
It does.
base.
That's about 10 centimeters
Yeah.
or 20
And
centimeters.
I think what I really like about this is that you can make this structure. It's absolutely solid, purely out of wool, no wires. There is an option to use wires, but I didn't use wires because I wanted to test myself and push
Yes.
myself to make these so they don't need wires. So these are absolutely solid, and they will. If I hold one of these spikes, it will bounce back to where I've positioned it. So it's kind of set into position once it's been.
That's really extraordinary. And was that many hours of felting?
This was a very tough course because if you skimp on the stems and how solid they are, nothing else works. So you have to make an awful lot of them, and that takes time. And then the next bit, which I didn't get finished, but I will do, was creating seed pods.
Now, I really like these. There's something very aesthetically pleasing about those.
Yes.
Whereas as you say, the other intertwined pieces are mysterious.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I could imagine them in I don't know. There's something like that, something that's growing up where it shouldn't, perhaps.
Yes.
Like imagine the vine or the greenery that grows around the castle when the Sleeping Beauty
Yes.
is asleep.
The rose bushes. The
Exactly, and
thorns, yes.
it all just takes over, and so it doesn't. It does come
Yes.
over as being a little bit sinister in my mind. Whereas these are seed pods, and how would you describe these? What do they look like to you?
Well, they look like seed pods. They look joyous to me because the pod end is orange and the bit that is going to be attached is green. So already I'm seeing a color harmony, which sends the right message to me that it's floral or possibly even something. It could be something that lives in the sea, the way you're clustering them together like that.
Yes.
Or they could be individual flower and seed pods. They're quite large. I mean, they're larger. You're holding them in your hands, and you've got about half a dozen of them.
Yes, I mean, I would say if you go from the base of my palm to
Fingers.
it's at the length of my finger to palm. And what I think is interesting is that although I have done a lot of felt making over the years, I did not predict how these were made.
Really?
I hadn't worked it out, and so that was
So
really exciting.
that's an enticer for us all to do that.
I know.
Wow.
Right, and so the last piece that I managed to make, so I'm gonna obviously work more with these.
Are you going to turn those into something? But I mean, the course isn't about products, it's about process, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think the way that Fiona had done it is that if you do all of these circular bases, then you've got a group of them. And also she recommended that you used a certain palette throughout, which again makes sense. However, for the last piece, I didn't use a palette throughout because
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you've seen this before.
Yes, you sent me photographs, but now I'm seeing it from the side. It's so different. It really looks like it's living.
So this looks to me like a sort of desert island with trees growing
Yes.
from the center of it, or it could be somebody said that they looked a bit like mushrooms.
They have the shape of, they have the growth of mushrooms, but not the top shape.
The top shape's not. No, well, the reason is the top shape, I think I can say this without giving away too much. The top shape is made from pre-felts, and you're
Right.
supposed to make your own pre-felts. But because I was A, running out of time on the course, and B, because I had so much pre-felt anyway, I cut up an old piece of mine, which was this bright green.
So it was a felt that you'd made before?
It was a felt that I had made
Yeah.
before. And so it doesn't follow the same color scheme as the other samples that I made. And then I just used a white base. But what it makes me think of, and it took me right back to childhood. Have you ever read the Narnia books?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So,
Yes, of course.
do you remember the duffel pods?
Oh, now that's a challenge.
Right. The duffel pods were
Which?
in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Oh,
where
yes.
And they go to different islands.
They do.
And
That was not my favorite one of the books.
no. So the children go to this island and it seems to be deserted, but there's a big house and all they can hear is thump, 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 thump. And then they can hear people talking.
Yes.
And then I can't remember how this happens, but they meet a magician and they find out that this thumping is the thumping of the duffel pods, who are creatures with only one leg and one foot. And they jump around on this single foot.
Yes.
And when they're sleeping, they lie on their backs and they shade themselves with the foot. So the leg goes upwards. And I think these are the duffel pod's feet.
Oh my goodness. They do. Now you're telling that story, I can see that.
Yep. So you can see they're lying on the back in the sun
Yes.
and shading themselves with
Yeah,
their
and
foot.
they've got a nice little spur heel as well, which is rather
That's it.
suitable
That's
for
exactly it.
a non-human creature.
Yes. So that was my duffel pods. And what is also interesting, if I can continue with this little story, is that I'm doing a course at the moment, or it's just finished. It's a project called Seen and Heard, where the Scottish Chamber Orchestra are collaborating with a local art centre, and they're creating a stop motion film about a giant who comes out of the mines. And I thought, actually, this could be used in the stop motion to show the landscape and the trees and so on. So anyway,
so I hope you've been have you been in touch with them there?
Well, we're working together. The next section will be in March, and I'm also hoping to teach some of the group a bit of felt making. So that's quite nice. So
that's
it might
fantastic.
Might lead
another
me
collaboration.
And another collaboration. And there you have it, our first episode of Season 2. We hope you've enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed talking. It was lovely to be in the studio again, catching up, swapping stories, and discussing life's ups and downs on the podcast where felt matters. This podcast is brought to you by the education team of the International Feltmakers Association. Conceived, hosted and produced by Vivienne Morpeth and Heather Potton. Editing by Heather Potton. Music by Artie Williams. Graphics by Rafaela Morpeth.
If, like us, you'd like to hear more from our amazing felting community, subscribe at the end of this episode. It helps other creatives to find us, and each episode will drop into your podcast platform for you to enjoy.